Picture this. You're standing in one of Europe's most prestigious museums. Priceless paintings hang on every wall. Masterpieces by Rubens Watteau Boucher. Security cameras watch every corner. Guards patrol the halls. These treasures are protected by millions of dollars worth of technology. And yet, over 6 years, one man walked in and out of 239 museums. He stole 172 times. He took paintings worth over $2 billion. He used no guns, no explosives, no computer hacking, just a Swiss Army knife and an obsession so powerful, it would destroy everything he loved. His name was Stefan Breitwieser. And by the time police caught him, he had become the most prolific art thief in human history. But here's the twist that will haunt you. He never sold a single piece. He didn't want money. He wanted something far more dangerous. This is the story of a man who loved art so much he destroyed it forever. Stay with me, because what happens at the end of this story? It will break your heart. Young Stefan Breitwieser wasn't like other children in Mulhouse, France. While kids his age played soccer and rode bikes, 8-year-old Stefan spent hours wandering the local museum, staring at paintings from centuries past. His mother, Mireille, worked long shifts as a nurse. His father had left when he was young. The museum became his escape, his refuge, his home. He would stand before 16th-century portraits for so long that guards would ask if he was lost. "No," he would whisper, eyes fixed on the canvas. "I'm home." Some people turn to friends when they're lonely. Some turn to family. Stefan Breitwieser turned to paintings created by people who had been dead for 300 years. And somehow in his mind they spoke back to him. They understood him in ways living people never could. This wasn't just appreciation. This was the beginning of an obsession that would consume his entire life. And in that quiet museum, surrounded by beauty and silence, a dangerous seed was planted. A seed that would grow into something monstrous. By 1995, Stefan was 23 years old, working odd jobs that never satisfied him. He was a waiter, a factory worker, always restless, always searching for meaning. One afternoon, while visiting a small museum in Germany, he noticed something that changed everything. The security was laughable. An ancient alarm system that probably didn't work. One distracted guard reading a newspaper. And there, hanging in a side hallway near the bathrooms, was a small 18th-century portrait. Beautiful. Neglected. Alone. He didn't plan what happened next. It was pure impulse. His heart pounding, Stefan walked to the painting, glanced around and lifted it off the wall. He waited for sirens to scream, for guards to rush in, for his life to end in handcuffs. But nothing happened. Just silence. He slid the painting under his jacket and walked calmly out the front door. And in that moment, a twisted justification was born in his mind. These museums didn't care about art. They just warehoused it, locked it away where no one could truly see it. But he would love it. He would give it the home it deserved. In Stefan's mind, he wasn't a thief. He was a rescuer. Stefan hung the stolen painting in his attic bedroom at his mother's house. He sat in front of it for hours, waiting for the guilt to crash over him like a wave. But it never came. Instead, he felt something he'd never experienced before. Euphoria. Pure electric joy. This painting was his. Not trapped behind velvet ropes. Not shared with tourists taking selfies. His. He woke up at 3 in the morning, turned on a small lamp and just stared. He whispered to the painting, thanked it for existing, for choosing him. Addiction doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It whispers. It tells you that what you're doing isn't wrong. It's necessary. Love. And Stefan Breitwieser was falling in love with something that would consume his entire life. The aesthetic high, the dopamine rush that comes from possessing beauty, was as powerful as any drug. And like any addict, Stefan wanted more. One painting wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The emptiness inside him was a bottomless well, and he had just started filling it with stolen masterpieces. 6 months after his first theft, Stefan met Anne-Catherine Kleinklaus at a friend's party. She was shy, pretty, and completely fascinated by his passion for art. He took her to museums on dates, talking about paintings the way other men talked about sports or cars. She had never met anyone like him. On their fifth date, Stefan brought her to his attic. She stepped inside and froze, seeing paintings covering every wall. "Where did you get all these?" she asked carefully. He paused, studying her face, then told her the truth. He waited for horror. For rejection. For her to run. Instead, and Catherine smiled. "Show me how you do it," she said softly. She didn't see a criminal. She saw a romantic anti-hero, a modern Robin Hood rescuing art from soulless institutions. "You're giving them a real home," she said, and Stefan felt tears in his eyes. "You understand," he whispered. "I understand you," she replied. In that moment their fates locked together like puzzle pieces. Where he went she would follow. And where they were going was straight into the darkness. And Catherine wasn't just an accomplice. He was a true believer. And together they would become the most prolific art thieves in history. Stefan and Anne-Catherine developed a system that was almost insultingly simple. They only stole during museum hours when security was more relaxed. They dressed like typical tourists. Backpacks, cameras, comfortable shoes. They targeted smaller regional museums with weak security, not the famous institutions with armed guards. And Catherine became the distraction, striking up conversations with guards about the exhibits while Stefan worked. He used a basic Swiss Army knife to unscrew frames. 2 minutes per painting, sometimes less. The artwork would slide into his backpack and they would walk out through the gift shop, often buying a postcard on their way out. Then they'd drive across borders immediately, making it harder for police to track them internationally. It was so simple it was almost insulting. Museums spent millions of dollars on the art itself, but security was an afterthought. Guards were underpaid and undertrained. Alarm systems were outdated. Stefan wasn't smarter than the system. The system just didn't care enough to stop him. And with every successful theft, his confidence grew. He started to feel invincible, untouchable, chosen. The man who loved art so much that even locked doors and security cameras couldn't keep him away. But confidence, when left unchecked, becomes arrogance. And arrogance always leads to mistakes. By 1997, Stefan had stolen from over 30 museums across Europe. His attic was running out of wall space. Paintings were stacked against each other, small sculptures lined the shelves. He'd stolen works by Boucher, Cranach, Bruegel, each worth hundreds of thousands, some worth millions. One afternoon, his mother Mireille climbed the attic stairs with a basket of laundry. She knocked, entered, and froze. The walls were covered in ornate frames and Renaissance vases. "Stefan," she whispered, "what is all this?" He smiled proudly like a child showing off straight A's. "My collection, maman. Isn't it beautiful?" She stood there in silence, the laundry basket trembling in her hands. Deep down she knew. He had to know. But mothers protect their sons, even when their sons are committing crimes. So she said nothing. She looked away. And that silence, that willful ignorance, would one day cost the world over $1 billion in irreplaceable art. Mireille Breitwieser had a choice in that moment. Call the police. Demand her sons stop. Or close the door and pretend she hadn't seen anything. She chose the third option. And history would never forgive her for it. Stefan's confidence had transformed into something darker. He no longer just stole paintings, he judged the museums he robbed. In Austria, he visited a museum displaying a Franz Hals portrait. Pretending to be an art student, he approached a curator and politely pointed out that the description card had the wrong date listed. The curator, embarrassed, checked the records and realized Stefan was right. They thanked him warmly for the correction. 2 hours later, Stefan walked out with that exact painting hidden in his backpack. In Belgium, he walked past a painting he'd already stolen months earlier from a museum in Germany. It hadn't even been reported missing yet. He smirked at Anne-Catherine. They don't even know it's gone. Stefan Breitwieser had stopped seeing himself as a criminal. In his twisted mind, he was the only person who truly cared about these masterpieces. Museums were prisons. Curators were lazy jailers. And he was the liberator, the savior, the only one who really understood. Psychologists have a term for this: grandiosity. It's the inflated sense of self-importance that comes with getting away with crime repeatedly. And Stefan had it in abundance. The higher he climbed, the harder he would eventually fall. One night in 1999, Stefan decided to escalate. He'd been researching a wealthy Swiss collector who kept a Rubens painting, worth over $4 million, in his private mansion. Unlike museums, this was someone's home. But Stefan had studied the man's schedule for months. He knew the security system was basic. He knew exactly where the Rubens hung. Late at night, Stefan and Anne-Catherine broke in through a ground-floor window. Alarms were disabled with simple wire cutting. They crept through the dark mansion using flashlights, Anne-Catherine terrified because this felt different. This felt wrong. They found the Rubens in the study and carefully removed it from the wall. Then a floorboard creaked beneath Anne-Catherine's foot. Lights flickered on upstairs. Footsteps. The owner was awake. They ran. Out the window, through the garden, into their car, tires screaming as they sped away. When they were safely across the border into France, Stefan started laughing, hysterical, manic laughter that echoed in the car. And Catherine wasn't laughing. For the first time she looked genuinely scared. That night marked a shift. What started as museum thefts, wrong but almost gentlemanly, had escalated into home invasion. Stefan had crossed a line and now there was no going back. Daily life in the attic had become surreal. Stefan and Anne-Catherine lived completely surrounded by stolen masterpieces. Every wall was covered. They ate meals in front of a wall. They slept beneath a boucher. It was both beautiful and suffocating. One night, Anne-Catherine woke at 2 a.m. to find Stefan sitting on the floor, staring at a painting with tears streaming down his face. "What's wrong?" she asked gently. He didn't look at her. "It's perfect," he whispered. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And I'm the only one who gets to appreciate it. Do you understand how lonely that is?" Stefan wanted to share beauty with the world, but his method, theft, hoarding, hiding, meant that beauty died in his attic. He'd become the very thing he hated, a jailer. And deep down he was starting to realize it. This is the collector's paradox. The more he stole, the more isolated he became. He couldn't show anyone his collection without risking arrest. He couldn't share his joy, his triumphs, his love. So the happiness he sought became a prison of his own making. And the walls of that prison were closing in inch by inch, day by day. Not every heist went smoothly. In Brussels, Belgium, Stefan and Anne-Catherine nearly got caught. They were in a museum attempting to steal a small Kranich painting. Anne-Catherine was distracting a guard as usual, but this time a museum employee, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, walked into the gallery where Stefan was working. He was mid-theft. The painting was already unscrewed halfway into his bag. He froze. Their eyes met. His mind raced through options. Explain. Confess. Instead he smiled casually and said in perfect French, "Excuse me, do you know where the restrooms are?" The woman blinked, studied him for a heartbeat too long, then pointed down the hall. "Thank you," Stefan said and walked away with the painting still in his bag. He met Anne-Catherine at the exit and they left calmly, but his hands shook the entire drive home. In the car, Anne-Catherine finally spoke. "That was too close. We should stop." Stefan's voice rose, defensive and angry. "Stop? We're just getting started. We're creating the greatest private collection in history." Anne-Catherine said quietly, almost to herself, "Or we're going to get caught." He was right. Luck always runs out. And Stefan's obsession wouldn't let him quit. By the year 2000, Stefan had committed over 100 heists. He celebrated this milestone by stealing a particularly valuable Boucher painting from a French museum. Back in the attic, he hung it on the only remaining empty wall space. He stepped back, admiring his collection like a curator at a grand opening. And Catherine watched him from the doorway. There was something manic in his eyes now. Something broken and feverish. 100, he said, grinning wildly. 100 works of art, saved from obscurity. And Catherine didn't respond. She'd stopped arguing with him months ago. She just followed now because she loved him, and love makes people do terrible things. 100 thefts. Each one was supposed to fill the emptiness inside him. But it never did. So he stole more. And more. And more. Because addiction doesn't have a finish line. It just keeps demanding, consuming, destroying. Until there's nothing left but the hollow shell of the person you used to be. Stefan was changing. Everyone could see it except him. For the first time, Stefan's crimes attracted serious international attention. Museums across Europe began comparing notes. A pattern emerged. Small to medium-sized works. Always old masters. Always stolen during museum hours. Always along a similar geographic route through France, Switzerland, Germany, Belgium, and Austria. In Paris, an Interpol detective named Inspector Laurent Berger sat in his office surrounded by theft reports, pins marking locations on a large map of Europe. A clear pattern emerged. Someone was moving through the continent like a ghost, systematically looting museums. This isn't a series of random thefts, Berger said to his team, his voice grim. This is one person. Or one team. And they've been operating for years, right under our noses. The hunt was officially on. For 6 years, Stefan had operated in the shadows, invisible and unstoppable. But shadows can't hide you forever. And across Europe, police were finally starting to connect the dots. The walls were closing in. Stefan had no idea that in detective offices from Vienna to Paris, his crimes were being mapped, analyzed, and traced. The clock was ticking. Stefan was changing in disturbing ways. He snapped at Anne-Catherine over small things. He refused to leave the attic for days at a time. He was convinced people were watching him, following him, plotting against him. One afternoon at a local cafe, Stefan noticed 2 men in suits sitting at a nearby table, talking quietly over coffee. His mind raced. Police. Interpol. Undercover agents? He grabbed Anne-Catherine's arm so hard she winced. We need to leave. Now, he hissed. They rushed out, practically running to their car. In the car, Anne-Catherine asked carefully, "What's wrong? What did you see?" Stefan's hands shook on the steering wheel. They were watching us. I saw them. Anne-Catherine looked back at the cafe. Stefan, they were just businessmen having lunch. He didn't believe her. He drove erratically, checking mirrors obsessively, convinced they were being followed. And in that moment, Anne-Catherine realized something terrifying. She was trapped in a car with someone spiraling into madness. Paranoia is the price of prolonged crime. And Stefan was paying it in full. The world was closing in. Not because police were actually near, but because his mind was turning against him. November 2001. Lucerne, Switzerland. The Richard Wagner Museum. Stefan decided to steal one last painting before taking a break. A 16th century work worth hundreds of thousands. It would be theft number 172. They arrived on a rainy afternoon. The museum was nearly empty. Perfect conditions. And Catherine looked uneasy, her intuition screaming danger. Maybe we should skip this one, she suggested quietly. Stefan shook his head. One more. Then we'll take a break. I promise. She'd heard this promise before. But she nodded because she always did. They entered the museum. Stefan immediately identified his target and approached it while Anne-Catherine positioned herself near the entrance. He pulled out his Swiss Army knife and began unscrewing the frame. He'd done this 171 times. Muscle memory. Then a voice behind him made his blood turn to ice. Excuse me, sir? What are you doing? A young museum guard stood there, confused and suspicious. Stefan's mind went blank. He'd been caught mid-act. For 6 years he'd been untouchable. And now everything was shattering. He dropped the painting and ran. And Catherine saw him sprinting and bolted too. But the museum was small. The exits were blocked. Guards converged. Police were called. 15 minutes later, Stefan Breitwieser and Anne-Catherine Klein-Klaus were in handcuffs. 6 years. 172 thefts. Over $2 billion in stolen art. And it ended with a simple question. What are you doing? Swiss police interrogated Stefan and Anne-Catherine separately. At first, Stefan denied everything, spinning elaborate lies. Then investigators showed him security footage, fingerprints lifted from frames, witness descriptions from a dozen museums. His lies crumbled. Inspector Berger, who had flown in from France, sat across from him in a cold interrogation room. How many museums? Berger asked. Stephen laughed bitterly, a broken sound. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Berger leaned forward. Try me. Stephen met his eyes. 239. Inspector Berger's face went pale. You're lying. Stephen shook his head slowly. I wish I was. Over the next 48 hours, Stephen confessed to everything. He drew detailed maps. Listed museums by country and city. Described paintings in vivid detail that only someone who had held them could know. The scale of his crimes became clear and Interpol was stunned. This wasn't just a thief. This was the most prolific art thief in recorded history. Stephen Breitwieser had spent 6 years building the greatest criminal art collection the world had ever seen. And now, in that cold room, he was tearing it all down, brick by brick, confession by confession. But the real horror? That was still to come. Police rushed to Mireille Breitwieser's house in Mulhouse, France, expecting to recover the treasure trove of the century. Dozens of officers climbed the attic stairs, hearts racing with anticipation. They opened the door and stopped in their tracks. The attic was empty. Bare walls. A few pieces of furniture. No paintings. No sculptures. Nothing. Inspector Berger stared in disbelief, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Where is it? He demanded. Stephen, brought to the scene in handcuffs, looked around in genuine horror. It was here, he whispered. It was all here. They tore the house apart. Basement. Garage. Garden shed. Nothing. Over $2 billion in art had vanished like smoke. Imagine being a detective who just solved the biggest art heist in history, only to find that the stolen art has disappeared again. Not taken by another thief. Just gone. Erased. As if it never existed. Inspector Berger turned to the one person who would know the truth. Mireille Breitwieser stood in her kitchen, arms wrapped around herself. Madame Breitwieser, Berger said slowly, his voice tight with control. Where is your son's collection? Mireille said nothing. But her eyes filled with tears. Mireille Breitwieser was arrested and interrogated. For hours she refused to talk, sitting in stony silence. But under pressure, threatened with decades in prison as an accomplice, she finally broke. When I heard Stephen was arrested, Mireille said, her voice shaking, I panicked. I knew the police would come. I knew they'd take everything. So I protected him. Inspector Berger leaned forward. Protected him how? She took a shuddering breath. I destroyed it. Silence filled the interrogation room like a physical presence. You destroyed what? Berger's voice was barely a whisper. The paintings, Mireille said, tears streaming down her face. The sculptures. All of it. She described working for 3 days straight. Taking paintings off their stretchers and shredding the canvases with scissors. Throwing ornate antique frames into the trash. Dumping 18th century silver and bronze sculptures into the Rhine-Rhone Canal. Burning smaller works in her fireplace. Burying fragments in her garden. She destroyed centuries of irreplaceable art, not for money or malice, but because in her twisted maternal logic, if her son couldn't have the art, no one could. And if the evidence was gone, maybe the crime would seem less severe. Mireille Breitwieser thought she was being a good mother. Instead, she murdered history itself. Art historians and museum curators from across Europe convened to assess the damage. Using Stephen's detailed confessions and police reports, they compiled a devastating list. 172 works of art stolen. Approximately 110 completely destroyed by Mireille. Only 60 recovered, most damaged from the canal, garden and trash. Estimated total loss, $1.4 billion. But it wasn't about money. In Vienna, a museum curator opened a box sent by French police. Inside were shredded fragments of a Watteau painting that had hung in her museum for 150 years. She tried to piece the scraps together on a table like a jigsaw puzzle. A hand here. Part of a face there. Most of the pieces were missing forever. She started to cry. Art isn't just about money. It's about connection. A painting from 1750 connects us to people who lived 275 years ago. Their hands touched that canvas. Their eyes saw that world. When Mireille Breitwieser destroyed those paintings, she didn't just destroy objects. She destroyed time itself. She severed our connection to the past. Forever. Among the lost, François Boucher's landscape with watermill destroyed. Antoine Watteau's La Fenêtre, only fragments recovered. Lucas Cranach the Elder's Sibyl of Cleves destroyed. A Peter Bruegel the Elder sketch destroyed. Dozens more lost to history. Some were the only surviving works by certain artists. Mireille didn't just destroy paintings. She erased entire artistic legacies. And we will never get them back. January 2003. Stefan stood trial in Switzerland. The courtroom was packed with journalists, museum directors, and art historians. The prosecutor painted him as a narcissistic criminal who robbed the world for pleasure. He claims he loved art. But if you love something, you don't imprison it in an attic. You don't hide it from the world. His so-called love was possession. Obsession. Greed disguised as passion. The defense argued mental illness. Hoarding disorder, addiction, compulsion rather than malice. He never sold a single piece. He never profited. This was a man trying to fill a void that could never be filled. When Stefan took the stand, he was gaunt and exhausted. He apologized to the museums. But then he said something chilling. "I'm sorry for what my mother did. But I'm not sorry I took those paintings. For 6 years I saw them. Really saw them. Not as tourists rushing through galleries. Not as investments in vaults. I lived with them. I appreciated them. Maybe that was wrong. But it felt right. And I would do it again." The courtroom gasped. Even his lawyer looked stunned. Verdict: guilty on all counts. Sentence: 33 months in prison. Stefan Breitwieser never truly understood what he'd done. Even in that courtroom he believed he was the victim, robbed of his collection, his freedom, his purpose. He never grasped that what he took from the world could never be returned. Mireille Breitwieser faced her own trial in France for destruction of cultural property and receiving stolen goods. Unlike her son, she showed genuine remorse, sobbing on the stand. "I didn't know what else to do. I was scared. I thought I was helping." The judge was unmoved. "Madame Breitwieser, fear does not excuse destroying over $1 billion in irreplaceable art. You had choices. You chose devastation." Verdict: guilty. Sentence: 18 months in prison, suspended. She served no jail time. She went home. But her son's collection, masterpieces that survived centuries, was gone forever. And Catherine Klein-Klaus was tried as an accomplice. She admitted to acting as a lookout but claimed Stefan manipulated her, that she loved him and believed his delusions about rescuing art. The court gave her a lighter sentence, 12 months suspended, due to cooperation. After the trial, a journalist asked if she regretted her actions. And Catherine paused for a long time, her face haunted. "I regret trusting someone more than I trusted myself." She was the shadow in Stefan's story. He loved him. And that love made her complicit in one of the greatest cultural crimes in history. Love is powerful. But it's not an excuse. It never is. Stefan was released from prison in 2006, ordered to stay away from museums for life. He returned to Mulhouse and tried to rebuild. But how do you rebuild when your entire identity has been stripped away? He worked at a factory assembling car parts. One day a co-worker invited him to a local museum exhibit. Stefan froze, feeling actual physical pain. "I can't," he said quietly. "I'm not allowed." He hadn't been inside a museum in 5 years. The one place where he felt truly alive was now forbidden to him forever. It was like banning an addict from breathing. Stefan Breitwieser lost more than his freedom. He lost his identity. Without art he was nothing. Just a man who once held beauty in his hands and destroyed it. The ban was technically legal punishment, but psychologically it was torture. Every day he woke up knowing that masterpieces existed in buildings just blocks away and he could never see them again. The paintings he once possessed in secret were gone. The paintings in museums were forbidden. He existed in a gray void, haunted by beauty he could no longer touch. And in that void, something dark began to grow again. Addiction doesn't end with prison. It waits. In 2011, 10 years after his arrest, Stefan relapsed. He couldn't help himself. The pull was too strong. He stole again, a small painting from a museum in Bern, Switzerland. It should have been impossible. Police had been monitoring him for years, tracking his movements, watching for any sign he might return to his old habits. He didn't even make it out of the country before they arrested him. Back in court, the judge was furious. "You learned nothing," she said, her voice sharp with disappointment and anger. Stefan was sentenced to another 3 years in prison. And the truth became heartbreakingly clear. He couldn't stop. Even when it destroyed him. Even when it cost him everything. The siren call of stolen art was stronger than any fear of jail, stronger than common sense, stronger than survival instinct. Because that's what obsession does. It doesn't let go. It doesn't forgive. It doesn't care about consequences. It just demands. And demands. And demands. Until there's nothing left but ruins. Stefan served his second sentence and was released again. He lives in France today, free but forever broken, forever banned, forever hungry for something he can never have again. As of 2025, Stefan Breitwieser has served both his sentences and been released. He lives quietly in France, banned from museums for life. He occasionally gives interviews and remarkably he still defends his actions as love. In a 2019 interview he said something that reveals how little he's changed. "I miss the paintings every day. Not because of their value, but because they were mine. And now they're gone." He still doesn't understand. After everything, the arrests, the trials, the destruction, he still sees himself as the victim. His mother, Mireille, never went to prison. She lives with the knowledge that her hands destroyed treasures that survived centuries. And Catherine vanished from public life after her trial. Some say she lives quietly in Switzerland under a different name. Others say she never recovered from the guilt, that she struggles with depression and regret. We may never know. What we do know is this. The 3 people at the center of this story, Stefan, Mireille, and Anne-Catherine, destroyed more art than any war, any fire, any natural disaster in modern European history. And they did it not out of hatred but out of love. Twisted, possessive, destructive love. Stefan Breitwieser remains unrepentant. He sees himself as a tragic figure, an artist misunderstood. But history will remember him differently. Not as an art lover, but as an art destroyer. The man who stole beauty and buried it in darkness forever. Let's take a moment to understand what was actually lost. We're not talking about reproductions or mass-produced prints. We're talking about original works by old masters. Paintings that took months or years to create. Works that survived world wars, revolutions, fires, and floods. In some cases, these were the only surviving works by certain artists. When Mireille destroyed them, she didn't just destroy paintings. She erased entire artistic legacies. Imagine if someone burned the Mona Lisa, shredded Starry Night, cut up the Last Supper. That's the scale of what happened here. Only it happened to hundreds of lesser-known but equally important treasures. Art historians gathered to mourn specific losses. A Watteau portrait that only 5 photographs captured now exists only in those images. A Cranach the Elder work was recovered in fragments so small and damaged that restoration is impossible. Dozens of 18th-century silver and bronze sculptures were melted into unrecognizable scrap or corroded beyond repair at the bottom of a canal. Some paintings were by artists we barely remember today, but who were celebrated masters in their time. Their last surviving works are gone. Future generations will never know they existed. We live in a world slightly darker, slightly emptier because of what Mireille Breitwieser did in 3 days of panic. And that darkness is permanent. Forensic psychologists have studied Stefan Breitwieser's case extensively. What drives someone to steal not for profit but purely for possession? The answer is complex. Stefan displayed classic symptoms of hoarding disorder combined with obsessive-compulsive tendencies. He showed clear signs of narcissism, the belief that he deserved the art more than anyone else, that his appreciation was somehow purer, more legitimate. Most tellingly, he appeared unable to form deep emotional connections with people, so he formed them with objects instead. The paintings became his friends, his family, his identity. Without them he was nobody. Psychologists call this the collector's fallacy, the belief that more possessions equal more happiness. But it's a lie. The more Stefan acquired, the emptier he felt, so he acquired more, creating a vicious cycle. One expert said, Stefan Breitwieser is a case study in pathological collecting. He didn't steal to sell. He stole to own. And ownership for him was identity. We want to believe criminals are simply evil, that they make clear conscious choices to hurt others. But people like Stefan are more complicated. They're broken in ways that make them dangerous. And no prison sentence can fix that kind of fundamental break in the human psyche. He's out there right now, still broken, still hungry, still obsessed. In the aftermath of Breitwieser's arrest, European museums completely revolutionized their security systems. His crimes exposed a fatal flaw in how we protect art. Changes included RFID tags on all valuable frames that trigger alarms if removed from designated areas. Dramatically increased camera coverage with AI monitoring that detects suspicious behavior. Random security patrols during museum hours, not just at closing. An Interpol database where museums share theft reports in real time. Individual alarms on paintings themselves, not just on exits. Insurance requirements forcing security upgrades. Today, a security consultant walking through a modern European museum can point to dozens of improvements directly inspired by Stefan's methods. If someone tried what Breitwieser did today, they'd be caught in seconds, one expert explained. His crimes were a wake-up call. Stefan Breitwieser exposed how vulnerable our cultural heritage really was. And while his actions were monstrous, they forced the art world to take security seriously. In a twisted, tragic way, his crimes made museums safer. The paintings he didn't destroy are now better protected because of him. It's a legacy he never wanted and probably doesn't appreciate. But it's the only positive thing that came from his 6-year rampage across Europe. Not everything was destroyed. Some pieces were recovered from the canal, pulled from trash bins before collection, dug up from Mireille's garden. Conservators worked miracles trying to restore what they could. In Vienna, a conservationist carefully showed a painting recovered from the Rhine-Rhone Canal. Water damaged, colors faded and bleeding, canvas warped, but recognizable. It's not the same, she said sadly, running her fingers near the cracked surface. It will never be the same. But at least it exists. At least future generations can see something of what it was. A few examples survived. A Boucher landscape, water-damaged but restorable. Several small portraits rescued before Mireille destroyed them. Antique frames, many restored and reused for other works. In the ruins of Stefan's collection, there were glimmers of hope. Pieces saved. Stories preserved. Connections to the past maintained. But for every painting recovered, 3 were lost forever. And that's the math of destruction. It always takes more than it gives back. The recovered works sit in museums today, often with small plaques explaining their journey. Stolen 1998. Recovered 2002. Restored 2004. Behind those clinical words lies an entire nightmare. But at least these paintings survived. At least they can still speak to us across the centuries. At least beauty in some small measure won. This story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Why do we feel the need to own beauty? Why isn't it enough to simply see it, experience it, appreciate it? Is art meant to be locked away in museums or shared freely? Where's the line between appreciation and obsession? Stefan Breitwieser asked a question society doesn't want to answer. Do museums really protect art or do they just warehouse it? He answered that question wrongly by stealing. But the question itself remains. How many masterpieces sit in museum storage, never displayed, rarely seen? How many private collections hoard beauty behind locked doors? This story isn't just about one thief. It's about all of us. Every time we visit a museum and feel that pull, the desire to reach out, to touch, to possess, we're feeling what Stefan felt. The difference is most of us control it. He didn't. Or couldn't. There's something universal in his pathology, something that speaks to the human desire to possess beautiful things. We take photos of sunsets trying to capture them. We buy art prints trying to own a piece of greatness. We collect, hoard, preserve. The instinct Stefan felt isn't alien. It's human. He just followed it to its darkest possible extreme. And in doing so he showed us what we're capable of when obsession overrides reason, when love becomes possession, when desire becomes destruction. Stefan wanted to save art from being forgotten. Instead he ensured it would be lost forever. He wanted to be remembered as a great collector, a connoisseur, someone who understood beauty in ways others couldn't. Instead he's remembered as a destroyer, a thief, a man whose love became poison. He wanted to fill the emptiness inside him with beauty. But the only thing he filled was a landfill. A canal. A fireplace. Garbage heaps overflowing with shredded canvas and broken dreams. Picture him now, alone in a small apartment, staring at a blank wall where a stolen painting once hung. He closes his eyes and tries to remember the details. But memory fades. Just like the paintings themselves. Gone. In the end, Stefan didn't just lose his freedom. He lost something far more important. The ability to stand in front of a masterpiece and simply see it. Not own it. Not hide it. To see it. Experience it. Let it move him. That simple pleasure is denied to him forever now, banned from museums for life. And maybe that's the cruelest punishment of all. He destroyed the thing he loved most in the world. And in destroying it he destroyed himself. All that art, all that history, all that beauty, destroyed not by war or fire or accident, but by a mother trying to protect her son. The tragedy is almost unbearable. And there's no happy ending. There never was. From the moment Stefan lifted that first painting off the wall, this story could only end one way. In darkness. In loss. In permanent, irreversible destruction. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the story of Stefan Breitwieser, the man who stole $2 billion in art and destroyed $1.4 billion of it. He's free today, walking the streets of France, banned from museums, living in the shadow of the greatest artistic loss in modern history. His mother, Mireille, never went to prison. She lives with the knowledge that her hands destroyed treasures that had survived centuries. And Catherine vanished from public life. Some say she lives quietly in Switzerland. Others say she never recovered from the guilt. And the art? Gone. Shredded. Burned. Melted. Lost forever. Because one man loved beauty so much he had to possess it. And his mother loved him so much she destroyed it. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with me. This is a hard story. But it's an important one. Because it reminds us that obsession, no matter how pure it seems, can turn into poison. And love, without boundaries, can become destruction. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And if you ever find yourself in a museum standing in front of a painting that moves you, just look. Don't touch. Don't take. Just look. Because that's enough. Has to be. This has been Pam. Kindly like and subscribe to True Crime Stories by Pam. Please stay curious. Stay kind. And remember, some things are meant to be shared, not owned.